Well, hello and welcome back to the Sky Blues History Podcast. I'm Claudio, and as always, I'm joined in spirit and expertise by the brains of the operation, our esteemed club historian, Jim Brown. Tonight's episode, the first of our special two-parter, is all about record transfers, the players who at one time or another became the club's most expensive signings. Some of these deals broke the bank, some didn't quite live up to the hype, but there were others, and a special few, who proved to be worth every penny. Some names you'll know well from watching them play, others you might only know from reading about them, but every one of them holds a unique place in the Sky Blues history by being at some point the record signing. And tonight's topic actually comes from a suggestion by a good friend and follower of the podcast, Mark Rainbow, who I recently travelled with Mark to Hull away, and during the journey we had conversations about what we could talk about, and he wrote into Jim and emailed and says, how about an episode on record transfers? So cheers, Mark, for that. It's a great suggestion. Get the words out. Before we dive in, quick reminder to all to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and if you're enjoying it, tell your fellow Sky Blue friends about us. The more the merrier. And if you've got an idea for an episode and you want to share your own memories, drop Jim a message at claryborton@gmail.com. He loves hearing from fellow fans and will answer to everyone. One final thing before we get going, how about this for a sign of where we are today? The club just announced that over 12,500 season tickets have been sold already in 5 days. Now, there's a waiting list as well, a waiting list for a Sky Blues season ticket. That's something I genuinely never thought I'd see in my lifetime. What about you, Jim? That's quite unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's a first. It's never been known before. I thought it was interesting that the club put a cap on the number of season tickets. And that cap, effectively, if all the last season's season ticket holders renew, then that cap has been reached. So that waiting list, I don't think it's going to go down. It's not going to go down very fast, is it?
No, and I've yet to renew mine. I'm doing it tomorrow, actually. But it's just incredible. It's just absolutely. I mean, you said last week, didn't you? You thought it would exceed last season, and I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe. But yes, it's there's a genuine appetite for Coventry City Football Club, isn't there, at the moment?
Yes, I think you're going to see a lot of full houses at the CBS next season.
So I thought it was a good way to start. So we were talking about records. So record transfer fees, and I wouldn't say we've not had a lot really, but actually looking at the list, it's not bad, is it?
It's not bad. It's just that we haven't had until Hadji Wright last season. We hadn't had a record transfer signing since Robbie Keane back in 1999. We've had all those barren years when we were in the lower divisions, and Robbie's record has stood the test of time. The interesting thing about transfer fees is that they've never been really revealed. Although I think things have got worse in the last 15 or 20 years. The clubs have been very reluctant to report fees, and the media have sort of made their mind up on what it was, or somebody's leaked the information. But in the olden days, it was more common knowledge what the transfer fee was. We're going to go right back to the start. As a club before World War I, I'm not aware of any major transfers. We were a Birmingham League side, Southern League side. If we paid £100 for a player, I think we'd have broken the bank.
Yeah.
So the earliest one I'm aware of occurred just after the end of World War I, in 1918, when the club were making a good fist after being in Southern League Division 2 in the 1914-15 season, before football came to a halt. The as the war came to an end, the club's directors felt they really did want to push to get in the Football League, and they did a lot of lobbying amongst league clubs. And then there was this transition season, 1918-19, where the regional league wasn't an official league, and City played with against a lot of league clubs from the north of England and the Midlands.
So this is the season before they entered the league, then, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And they were out to prove that they were good enough to, when the voting took place as football recommenced in 1919, that they would be good enough to get voted in. And they signed, they paid £500 for a chap called George Chaplain from Bradford City. Bradford City were, they were a first division club before the World War One, and even got to a cup final. And George Chaplain was a left back. He'd actually won Scottish cap in I think 1909, and this was seen as another real positive evidence that the club were ready for league football. He was 30 years old, so it was an experienced guy, and maybe £500 was a lot of money to pay for a 30-year-old, but it worked. He helped the club in that transition season do extremely well. They finished 9th out of 16 teams in the Midland and Northern section of that league season. And when the voting took place in London in June 1919, the club were elected to the Football League, the second division, as it was then. There were only two divisions. And Chaplain went on to play a key role in the first 3 seasons in the Football League. He was the club captain, had a few injuries in that first dreadful season where they just escaped re-election, but then was a virtual ever-present for the next 2 seasons. But in the 22-23 season, I think his legs were beginning to go a bit. But the bribery scandal, which we talked about before, which occurred at the final game of the 1919-20 season, caught up with the club. There was an official inquiry into that, and certain Bury players gave evidence, and the result was that the George Chaplain, along with the Coventry manager who'd already been sacked anyway, and David Cook, the chairman of Coventry City, were suspended, sine die, forever.
It's interesting to see that the FA still don't move at any pace even today. If it took that long, 3-4 years to sort that out.
Well, yes, I think the rumours grew and grew and grew to finally somebody said, "Hang on, there's more to this than than meets the eye."
So what was the signings in that era, say 1918? What are other clubs paying for players? Have you got anything on that?
I think the British transfer fee was something like £2,000, maybe £2,500.
Yeah, because I can't remember when did Alf Common go for £1,000? Was that before then? Was it?
Yeah, that was early 1900s. Yeah.
But this is still good though. I mean, we're non-league, aren't we, as such? We're Southern League clubs.
Absolutely. And poor old George, he was seen as he felt that he was the scapegoat. I think he'd probably been involved in the deed, but the whole idea was coming from the directors, not him. And he vowed he'd never set foot in Highfield Road again. And he went off to run a pub, the Black Horse in Marton.
Oh yeah, the curry house now.
Does it still exist?
Yeah, it's a curry house. It used to be a curry house. It's a recent,
right.
Yes. It's on the bend just over the bridge. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know it
Right.
well. That's incredible. I bet that people who've been landlords and landladies there probably didn't have any clue whatsoever about that.
No. And he died in the early 1960s at the age of, I think, about 75. So,
Okay.
yeah, he lived a good life. And the following year, as I said, the club did get elected to the league, and they had that dreadful start where they didn't win a single game until Christmas Day.
Mm.
In an effort to bolster the very, very leaky defence, they paid Manchester City £1,100 for a chap called Ted Hannay. Another 30-year-old, he was very experienced I say very experienced. He played 78 games before World War One for Manchester City. But he was hopeless. He was dropped. He was dropped after, let me just check. He only played 20 games that season. He didn't help the defence very much at all. I think basically he was over the hill, and I think he played a dozen games the following season and moved on to Reading.
So how did the club find the funds for this to pay for these fees? Because I imagine the players themselves weren't getting paid a lot, were they?
No.
And
Well, that's interesting because that first season in the Football League, the attendances were very good. There were 20,000 for many games. Yeah, the capacity was only about 24,000, and they had some a lot of gates of 20,000 plus. I think the average was about 17,000, 18,000. So even though the results were poor, the fans, I guess it was the novelty of seeing league football and seeing some, there were some big clubs in the division. Tottenham were in there, West Ham, Birmingham City, Wolves, Nottingham Forest, and did I say Leicester? Yeah, Leicester, Fulham. Yeah, so it was a strong league. So that record was maintained. It wasn't broken for another 7 years.
right.
When they paid £1,200, so they broke the record by only £100 to Heart of Midlothian for a guy called Jock Ramage. At the time, the British record was £6,500. So
Okay.
in relation, it wasn't, a quarter
Who's
or a
that?
fifth
Who's
of
that
the.
for? Who was that player then?
I knew you were going to ask me that. So I'm just going to get that page up on. It's only on Wikipedia. Yeah, could it be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Alf Common, you mentioned earlier, he was the first £1,000 footballer. That was 1905.
Okay.
But the record in 1926, the record actually got shot up quite a bit during the 20s. And it was a guy called Andy Wilson, a Scottish international, who went from Middlesbrough to Chelsea for 6,500. And he was a top player. But Ramage, well, I have to say, it wasn't a great success. One of his earliest games, we lost 8-1 at Exeter. Oh, by the way, he was a centre half.
Well, I thought he was the goalkeeper.
Oh dear. Yeah, he was a centre half, and as I said, I think it was his third game. We lost 8-1 at Exeter. After 8 games, he was rested or dropped, whichever you want to say. He came back the following season, had a few games. I think he played 15 games, including a 6-0 loss at Swindon. After I played another 9 games, so 24 games in total, and then he moved on to Luton. So he goes down as a failure, an absolute waste of money.
Yes.
So next up, 2 years later, September 1928, they paid £1,700 for Billy Curtin from Aston Villa. Well, Curtin was a big name in Midlands football. He played 250 odd games for the Villa in midfield, including he scored the winning goal in the 1920 FA Cup final, and also appeared in their 1924 final losing side. He actually won a cap for England in 1921, scored in that one game. So he was a big name.
This is Third Division South by then.
No, we're still in. Oh, hang on, we're 1928. Yes, Third Division South. Yeah. He was 32 though, and I suspect his legs had gone.
We don't buy any young ones, do we? His record size.
No. He played 16 games, didn't score a single goal, and was sold to Kidderminster, or released to Kidderminster. Again, another failure. Billy Curtin. He ended up playing for Leamington Town.
Oh, did he? That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know how many games he played, but he probably found his level after us. So then you've got a big gap, 8-year gap, from 1928 to 1936. Now, what we'd seen in the meantime is that Harry Stoer had taken over as manager in 1931, and he was a shrewd man in the transfer market. You know, he got Clary Borton for a song in 1930.
Because this is our golden period now, isn't it?
This is our golden period, and of course it was a golden period where they didn't spend big in the transfer market. I think they bought Borton for £750 from Blackburn. But obviously they were in Division 3 South. They won promotion in 1936, and in the run into that promotion, they splashed the cash, spent £2,000 on Jack Astley from Brentford. Astley was a bit younger, 26-year-old. He was a right back, and he was a reserve for Brentford. He played a few games for the first team, but Brentford were a first division side at that time.
Right. In those days, Jim, did we have the transfer? I suppose it is the window, isn't it, where you couldn't sign anybody after a certain date in March. Did that apply in those days?
Do you know? I'm not sure. You could buy players throughout the season. I'm not sure whether there was a transfer deadline in March. Quite possibly was.
There was definitely one in later years, wasn't there? Because you couldn't sign anybody in the last 6 weeks of the season or something. It's to stop people.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. But Astley proved a very, very shrewd buy, like most of Harry Stoer's. And he went on to play 145 successive games.
Wow, that's good considering the time to play football were a bit rougher than it is now, that's for sure.
It was. And he was a tough, rough right back. So he didn't miss a single game from that point right to the Second World War. And obviously got his medal for Division 3 South, and City's strength in the second division in those pre-war years was the defence. You know, they kept a very, very tight ship. after being a sort of goal machine in the early 30s.
Ever present for 3 seasons. That's incredible.
Very, very strange for an outfield player.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And soon after they won promotion, they didn't buy anybody in the summer. They won promotion, but they did go out in October 36 to sign Jackie Brown from Wolves, who was a winger, primarily a right winger from Northern Ireland. He was on the fringe of the Wolves team. He played a few games, but he made a big impact for us in 36-7. He played 29 league games and was top scorer with 13 goals.
That's good.
So one of our most prolific wingers, and he was good. He was very good, and he won Northern Ireland caps. In fact, he was one of the first men to play for both Irish teams.
Oh, right.
There was a lot of controversy about the Republic of Ireland team back then. You know, they just had independence in the 20s, and he was one of the first dual internationals. He was also top scorer the following season. I think he got another 13 goals the following season, virtual ever present. But early in the 38-9 season, he was sold to Birmingham, and you can ask me how much he was sold for, and I don't know. But I suspect it was for a profit. You know, we played Wolves 3,000. I would suspect Jackie Brown went for probably 7,000 or 8,000. And in 1936, the British record, was held by David Jack, who Arsenal signed from Bolton Wanderers in the late 20s. That record stood for quite some years.
He's one of the 7 Arsenal players who played for England, didn't he? In the one international, I think.
Yes, yeah, he was a really classy player, and his record actually stood for 10 years.
Wow, that's interesting. So that must have been a lot that they played for him at the time, then, for not to be surpassed.
Yeah, yes, it was. So I think in summer of 38, I think the club knew that Jackie Brown had itchy feet and was likely to go, and the club signed another Wolves winger, a guy called George Ashall. They paid 3,500 for him, and he was 27-year-old winger, could play either right or left. Now he was a big signing. You know, this is when City began to punch their weight. You know, they'd become an established second division side. Ashall was a regular for Wolves the previous season and had a really good season. In fact, he was on the verge of the England side. He was chosen for the Football League. In those days, the Football League had games against other leagues, and he was chosen for the Football League side that season. Obviously, we're getting near the war. You know, he basically had one season with us before war broke out. But he returned to the club after the war, and he played quite a few games for the club, about a season and a bit. But he broke his leg. He broke his leg against the Albion in 1947, and that ended his career. I think he was about 33 at the time, 34. But a very, very good winger. I wouldn't say he was a total successful signing. I don't think he adequately replaced Brown. He was one of those players you'd have to sit on the fence whether it's a good or bad signing, I think. And in fact, he only got him for one season before the war. So then we moved to the post-war period, and the British record, Jack's record, was broken in 1938 when Arsenal paid £14,000 for Bryn Jones from Wolves, and he suffered because he only had one season with the Arsenal before the war. So
right,
but that record stood until 1947, when a chap called Billy Steele, another famous Scottish international winger, went from Morton to Derby for 15,500. They were the FA Cup holders at the time, and City's record went that year as well. March 1947, when they paid 6,000, so it's just under half the British transfer record, to Birmingham City for Don Dearson. And Dearson was he was on his way down. So remember, Claudio, Harry Stoer was the shrewd investor, never paid big fees.
Yeah.
Because Harry's gone to Birmingham in 1945. So Harry, I think, sold us a dud with Dearson. He was a 33-year-old halfback. He'd won caps for Wales before the war and played a lot of games for the Blues in the First Division. He did manage 88 games for us, a good solid player, but he wasn't the dynamic midfielder you needed to make a serious promotion challenge.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to find out the thinking behind some of these transfers, because they got them quite late in the season. So it must have been obviously to try and get us promoted, but we finished about 8th or 9th, I think we.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, and that was that tragic season when the manager died. Dick Bayliss was he was Stoer's chief scout or come assistant manager, and when Stoer went to Birmingham, Dick Bayliss got the job, but he had that. He died in April 47, just after he'd signed Dearson, actually. So Dearson, I would say, wasn't a great success, but the following season, October 47, they did make a very, very shrewd signing. Again, another winger. We like to buy wingers, didn't we?
Yeah.
We paid £7,000 to Swansea, who were a third division side, for Norman Lockhart, another one from Northern Ireland, only 23 years old. He'd hit the headlines by scoring twice against England for Northern Ireland the previous year, and he went on to make almost 200 appearances for Coventry.
Yeah.
Despite having a few injuries along the way, and he stayed with the club right through till we were relegated in 1952, and a few weeks into the new season, he was sold to the Villa for quite a hefty fee. I think something like 18,000. I seem to remember. Very good winger, very consistent. He was in the 50-51 team that perhaps should have got promotion. Scored a lot of goals, and Lockhart was, a very good crosser of the ball, and chipped in with a fair few goals as well. So he was in my eyes, he was definitely a success. I can't say that for the next man. November 1948, we paid £8,000 to Notts County for a guy called Jack Marsh, 26-year-old inside forward. When His first game was actually at Forest, and the match report said the new signing Marsh looked decidedly unfit. He didn't play again for several months. I don't know whether he was just unfit or he had injuries, but he didn't live up to the expectations that an £8,000 fee warranted. He did, however, he came back into the side in March after a long break, and he managed 4 goals in 11 games, including a hat-trick at Plymouth. Completely out of the blue by the sound of it.
Yes.
But it didn't save him. He spent most of the following season in the reserves, and he left just before the transfer deadline in 1950 in a part exchange with a striker called Ken Chisholm, who later went on to score a lot of goals, not only for us but for in the first division for Cardiff and Sunderland. So Marsh, his career fizzled out very quickly after going to Leicester. I don't think he played many games for them, and I think we got the best deal out of that one with Leicester. So he was £8,000. The record, the British record, was still only 14,000. So
I was just looking at
it was a big fee.
Looking at the goal scorers to 48, 49. If it wasn't for is it Roberts and Murphy, we wouldn't score any goals, would we? We hardly scored any goals.
No, I know. Especially after George Lowry left.
Yeah.
But yeah, the transfer record was going up quite rapidly. Tommy Lawton in 47 went to Notts County for 20,000. He was the first £20,000 player. Len Shackleton a few months later went from Newcastle to Sunderland for 20,500. 1949, Johnny Morris went from Man United to Derby for 24,000. So that record was going up quite rapidly. And our record went in October 49 when Harry Stoer is back in charge. And he signs a centre-half from his old club, Birmingham, Martin McDonnell. And that was a very, very shrewd buy. McDonnell went on he was only 25 at the time, could play at fullback. He later became the centre-half. Only a fringe player at St Andrews, but Harry threw him straight in, and he became a real stalwart in the 1950s. In 5.5 years, he only missed 11 games.
Wow, that's impressive.
A real solid performer. And you're never going to believe this, but Harry Stoer signed him again for Derby from Coventry. So Harry he signed him 3 times.
It's his equivalent of John McGovern to Brian Clough, isn't he?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think he won promotion from the 3rd division with Derby. Yeah. So, McDonnell was a really good buy. And he later became an estate agent in Coventry.
I was saying that Harry Stoer, he doesn't get enough plaudits, does he, really, as a manager?
No, he doesn't. But he was a genius, absolute genius. And they do say, that about Brian Clough and Peter Taylor got a lot of picked up a lot from Harry Stoer because Clough knew him well. And Peter Taylor knew him well. He knew him from playing goal for Coventry after the war. And Clough, I think, would just have known him from the Derby days.
Yeah.
In the late 50s and early 60s. So yes, Harry's back in charge and a good buy. But then he made a mistake.
Oh no.
He made a mistake. We were top. This is December 1950. We're top of the second division, the first time in the highest position we've ever been in league football. And we were scoring goals for fun. Ted Roberts as centre forward. We had Peter Murphy. No, we didn't. We had Plum Warner on the wing, Bryn Allen inside forward. Ken Chisholm scored a lot of goals. And Lockhart on the left wing. And for some reason, I'd love to know the reason for this, but the club paid £20,000 to Grimsby, who were a second division side, to be fair, for Tommy Briggs. Now, Briggs, he was one of those players who scored goals wherever he went. With Grimsby, I'll tell you this, Claudio, before he joined us, he got 47 goals in 58 games in Division 2.
Right.
He was the leading scorer, the leading league scorer in 1949-50.
So the 20 grand could have been a steal, is what?
It could have been. Yeah, the British record was only 30,000 at the time.
Blimey.
So when his team's top of the league and he's, do you know what it's like? It's almost like Virel Moldovan.
Yeah, yeah.
We had Dublin, Huckabee, Whelan scoring goals for fun, and they bring in Moldovan. Why? Exactly the same. Why did they bring Tommy Briggs in? He dropped Ted Roberts, who was a big favourite, not only on the terraces, but in the dressing room. He dropped Roberts. Briggs scored on his debut in a 5-2 win over Bury. He scored in the following game at QPR, although we lost. But suddenly the wheels fell off.
Oh, no.
He was dropped after 7 games, Briggs, and Ted Roberts brought back in. It didn't stop the slump. The promotion chase fell apart. We finished 7th in the end. And a lot of people pointed to the decision to bring Briggs in as being the cause. So he only played 7 games after Christmas.
We got relegated the following season, didn't we?
We did. But Tommy had long gone. Tommy had gone. He only played 4 games the following season, early season. 4 games, 4 goals. Birmingham came in.
So how did we go from almost getting promoted to getting relegated the following year? That's incredible.
Well,
and Harry was
maybe,
did Harry was there?
Harry was there. Harry was there. Basically, too many players had gone over the hill.
Yeah.
George Mason, played pre-war. Alf Wood played pre-war. Plum Warner, Ted Roberts. They were all, that's 4 or 5 who played pre-war. And they were just past it, basically. And they weren't replaced.
I mean, looking at the list here, we used over 30 players, which is incredible for that time of that era. That's a lot of players, isn't it?
It is. That was the main reason. But I'm sure there's a Briggs element in there as well. It was a disaster. Briggs didn't settle. Briggs went to Birmingham. You never guess what? He carried on scoring for Blues. His record, he was one of the most prolific post-war strikers.
Unbelievable. Kevin Drinkle.
Pardon?
A bit like Kevin Drinkle.
Yes. Yeah.
It's true, wasn't it? He scored everywhere apart
Yeah.
from at Cov.
And Chris Chilton. Yeah, he
Another
scored
one.
bags for Hull. Yeah. Yeah. So that's Tommy Briggs. I'd love to know what happened there. I really would. I
So
really would.
I'm looking at the list. There's a big gap then, isn't there?
There is. Yeah. Well, because we got relegated. And all of a sudden, the club were at a different level, Division 3, ultimately Division 4. And £20,000 in Division 3 was, mega bucks.
Yeah.
And as far as the British transfer record went, that shot up from about 35,000 in the mid-50s to 65,000 when John Charles went from Leeds to Juventus.
Yeah.
And then in 62, Dennis Law went from Torino to Man United, 115,000. And that was just, it was earth-shattering, that.
Yeah.
The record went up 30,000 overnight. And City, as you say, there was a big gap. And we had to wait for Jimmy Hill to arrive. And he was very shrewd that first summer he bought 5 forwards and got a change out of 30,000 for 4 really good Division 3 forwards. Bobby Laverick was the exception. But as we know, not 12 months later, Jimmy thought that Terry Bly wasn't up to it and splashed 21,000, a club record, on George Hudson from Peterborough.
Yeah. I mean, as most people know, if you're from that era, he was godlike, wasn't he, to a lot of fans, George Hudson?
He was. He was the Messiah, the Hud, as they called him. And that was, you have to say, that was an inspired purchase by JH.
Because he had his critics, didn't he, for signing him and selling Terry Bly, because he was a favourite, wasn't he?
He did, yes, he did. But if you read the contemporaneous match reports and news articles, Bly had his critics. He was never George Hudson. Mm-hmm. Bly could just score goals. Unfortunately, we got the best out of him for the best part of a season. Poor old Notts County, who paid, I think, about 15,000 for Bly, massive fee for a Division 3 club. They got the worst of it. Bly misfired badly, and within 18 months he was playing non-league football with Grantham Town.
Wow. Yes.
Which, to be fair, it almost happened to George Hudson as well. He went from us to Northampton for a massive fee, 30,000 or 29,000, and within a year he was playing at Tranmere, and another 2 years he was out of football.
But they signed him, didn't they, to try and keep themselves in the top flight?
Yeah.
Wasn't it, at the time? Wasn't it? That's what they did. Yeah.
He scored the goals that would have kept them up. The trouble is the defence was leaky as colander.
Yeah.
They got relegated. So yeah, bit of JH magic with his transfers. He didn't make many mistakes. And the next 2 players we're going to talk about were undoubted successes.
See, these 3 players, the next one and the one after, for a lot of people, are in their all-time starting 11.
Definitely.
They're probably in yours. Wouldn't surprise me.
They are. So, following George Hudson, October 1964, City had been promoted to the 2nd Division. Jimmy wasn't happy with Bob Wesson, and he paid a world record for a goalkeeper, £35,000 for Bill Glazier from Crystal Palace. People thought he was mad. Why are you paying that much for a goalkeeper?
Yeah.
Jimmy knew what he was doing, didn't he? He
Yeah.
knew exactly what he was doing. We had a potential future England goalkeeper in our midst. And although we didn't win promotion that season, we did eventually 2 years later. In the meantime, poor old Bill broke his leg at Main Road in April '65, and Jimmy had to recall Bob Wesson, who did a sterling job because Bill was out for the best part of a year with his broken leg, and that's what probably cost him a call up to Alf Ramsey's '66 World Cup squad. Because prior to the broken leg, Bill had made 3 or 4 appearances for England under 23s. I don't think he'd conceded a goal for the under 23s, and was definitely being penciled in for a World Cup squad place.
Yeah, was it this Sheffield Wednesday keeper was the number 2 at the time for Banks?
Ron Springer, yes.
Yeah.
Ron Springer. I think Peter Bonetti was the third choice. Yeah, England had a lot of good keepers at that time, to be fair. You know, Jim Montgomery of Sunderland, top goalkeeper. John Jackson of Crystal Palace, he came a bit later, but he was a top goalkeeper. Alex Stepney, Manchester United. Gordon West, you know, he was number 2 to Banks for a good spell. So Bill broke the record, club record, and then just under 2 years later, in the summer of '66, Jimmy had the final piece of the jigsaw to get promotion. That was paying Middlesbrough $57,000 for midfield schemer Ian Gibbo. And okay, they had their ups and downs early on, but once they'd settled their differences and Gibbo had taken his head out of the sporting life, we got an absolute genius in midfield, didn't we?
Yeah, those 3 players, George Hudson, Bill Glazier, Ian Gibson, I think they'd have been in my dad's all-time 11. I think if you're a child of the '60s and you were part of that Sky Blue revolution, they're in there, aren't they?
Yes.
Definitely. Along with obviously the bargain of the century, George Curtis.
Yeah. Well, you see, in those 3 signings by Jimmy, they were all big statement signings.
Yeah.
You know, for a 3rd division side to pay 21,000, that was unheard of. Similarly, you know, Glazier, that shook the football world when Jimmy signed him. Everybody expected him to go to a 1st division club, and he came to Coventry. And then Gibbo had been Middlesbrough's star for 2 or 3 seasons, and nobody seemed to want to take the chance on him. Probably they knew about his off-field activities, but Jimmy was the man to take the chance, and it paid off.
And did we pay players well then in the '60s? Obviously, the cap had gone by then, hadn't it?
I would have thought we wouldn't be too far above the norm. I don't think it'd be anything too excessive.
Because Derek Robbins must have been, well, either Jimmy Hill had got him hypnotised, but he seemed to do what he wanted, didn't he? He was in charge, wasn't he?
Yeah. And he was in charge of not just the playing side. He was all the commercial side and invented the Sky Blue pool and, far more than just team affairs.
It reminds me a bit of the Damned United. You must have seen it. And
yes.
Bit where, Brian Clough and the owners having the conversation. He just says, "There you are. Just be a good lad. I'm. Give me the money. I'll sign the players. You just be a good lad and give me the money."
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels a bit like that, doesn't it? You know,
It
I know
does.
what I'm doing. You just give me the money.
Yeah. But it was a fantastic relationship,
Yeah.
wasn't it? And Jimmy was just a force of nature. He was just something else.
But by then, you see, you've got the confidence of the manager because already they've improved massively by the time he's signing Gibson. Yeah, so the owner's got the confidence to let him have the money to sign this player.
Yeah, exactly. But
It's,
12 months later, he didn't have the confidence to give Jimmy a 10-year contract.
well, I mean, that's ambitious, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think by Jimmy.
yeah. Maybe he already had the ITV job in his back pocket, and he thought,
Yeah.
if he gives me a 10-year contract, I'll take it. If he doesn't, then I'm off. Who knows?
Did the club want him to relinquish the television stuff, though? Do you think, or?
Well, no, all he did was the '66 World Cup, where he was if you like, the chairman of the pundits board, wasn't he? And if I remember rightly, then any televised game, which really was the FA Cup final of the World Cup, Jimmy would be the chief pundit, and I think he made a big impression in TV circles.
I know it's slightly off topic, but if anybody listening to this ever gets the chance to see old footage of 1970 and 74 with the punditry, it's different level to now. So they don't hold any punches, do they?
No,
Really?
no. Malcolm Allison, Pat Crerand, Derek Dugan.
They said it as it was, didn't they? They didn't care.
Yeah.
It's a different world. It's definitely not, well, no PC there. It was just, they just sounded like fans doing it.
Yes, yeah. It was almost Jeremy Kyle-like, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it's very good, very good.
So Coventry City are in the first division.
Finally.
And of course, it was a much more even playing field in those days. And I think we talked before that Jimmy obviously resigned before the season started, but the club hadn't bought any players after promotion. And the first player they bought was Tony Knapp when George Curtis broke his leg, and they only paid 25,000 for Knapp, which was was a derisory fee really in the first division in those days. I think the record was still British record was Dennis Law's 115,000.
So as a supporter then, Jim, did you think, we'll get some signings in?
No, I didn't, because we didn't think like that in those days. It was really exciting when Gibson signed, but I think you just accepted, our promotion team is going to take the first division by storm, and it did often happen. It wasn't unusual for a club to win promotion and not buy anybody. It is a different world these days.
Yeah.
There wasn't the gap. There was a gap, but it wasn't the gap it is now. For instance, in Leeds won promotion in '64, and immediately made a title challenge. They almost won the league in '64-5. Liverpool had come up. Liverpool had come up in '63 and won the league within 2 years.
Ipswich did it immediately, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
Alf Ramsey, yeah.
So it was a different world. But obviously, that first season, Noel Cantwell came in and bought Jerry Baker, Maurice Setters, Ernie Hannigan for modest fees, I'd say. Hannigan, I think, he was 50,000, so not quite as much as Gibbo had cost. But then in the January '68, we sold Bobby Gould to Arsenal for £90,000, and obviously Arsenal coveted Gould, but I got a feeling he wasn't a Campbell player, and Campbell wanted his own centre forward, so he went out and spent the money straight away on Neil Martin from Sunderland, and that was a definite positive purchase. Neil went on to have 4 good seasons at the club, scored, was leading scorer in at least 2 of those seasons, and was a very, very good servant for the club, and was a key part in keeping us up those first 2 seasons. They scored that famous last-minute goal against Leicester in '69 that effectively kept us up and sent Leicester down. And then in the European qualifying season, he had that great partnership with John O'Rourke, and it wasn't. He finally left in '71. He dropped into a midfield role for a while, and then was sold to Forest for a good fee. Actually, I think 65,000. We definitely got our money's worth with Neil.
Yeah, and also with Neil, he scored us the goals that kept us up, and Sunderland lost the goals and they went down, didn't they? Basically, they lost their goal scorer. And
yes, they did.
They were relegated, weren't they? Not long after.
Yeah. So I think we've covered a good half, haven't we, of the record signings in chronological order.
So that concludes. That concludes then that concludes the first part of our record signings.
Yeah.
I think
so. We'll pick it up next time with our first £100,000 signing, who was at the time was the most expensive fullback in British football.
Incredible. See, we record breakers all over. I mean, and in amongst what's coming up then in our next podcast is possibly the all-time greatest player in some eyes for Coventry City, alongside with a man who basically, waste of space is a bit harsh. I don't know. I think he was ousted by a 17-year-old after only 1 game. I'm just giving clues here. Another guy who was so fiery and possibly one of the best headers of the ball at the club's ever seen, and also some absolute legends and 2 or 3 players that kept us in the Premier League in the 90s.
Yes.
So there are some, and of course, maybe the most expensive teenager in world football at the time. I'm sure he was.
Absolutely.
So we've got some great players to talk about in the next episode. So please come back.
If I just summarise the pluses and the minuses, I think the pluses, you've got George Chaplain, Jack Astley, Jackie Brown, Norman Lockhart, Martin McDonnell, George Hudson, Bill Glazier, Ian Gibson, Neil Martin. So that's 9 pluses. And the negatives, Ted Hannay, Jock Ramage, Billy Curtin, all over the hill. Don Dearson, another one over the hill. Jack Marsh, God knows what was wrong with him. Tommy Briggs, the greatest. So 5, that's 7 minuses. I think George Ashall, I've got him on the fence. A bit of a success, but eventually not.
Is this where we apologise to the relatives of any of those players who may be listening?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, they didn't do it for the Super Sky Blues.
Yeah.
But the others, well done.
Yes.
Well, yeah, again, Jim, I really enjoyed that episode. I think it's very interesting, and I'm sure people listening will find it quite fascinating.
I hope so. There's some good stories in there, just to finish off, that George Chaplain. I didn't realise this until I did a little bit of research this afternoon. But he had 6 brothers. He came from Scotland. He has Dundee, I think. He had 6 brothers, and one of them was Jack Chaplain. Now, I wrote I wrote a book about Huddersfield Town in the 1920s. And
you don't mean in the 1920s, do you? You mean
no.
how old are you?
Yeah, the famous Herbert Chapman side that won 3 league titles in a row, and the man who was the trainer of that team and later became the manager was a guy called Jack Chaplain, and it wasn't as successful. They didn't win the league again. They didn't win the FA Cup. I think he got them to a Wembley final. But when I was doing a book signing in Huddersfield, a lady came up to me and said, no, sorry, I've got that wrong. I made an appeal in the Huddersfield Examiner for anybody who had relatives of the Huddersfield players or staff back in the, from that team in the 20s. And Jack Chaplin's daughter contacted me and sent me a few emails to tell me about Jack. And the revelation was that she found her granddad dead in bed.
Oh.
And he was murdered. In her opinion, he was murdered.
Right.
By his wife.
Okay, this is taking a sinister edge, this podcast.
It is. And I wrote about it in the book. And she was a little girl. It was I think it was 1952. And this lady was a little girl, and her parents, her father sent her round to her grandparents one Sunday morning to go and see her grandparents. And when she got there, the back door was always unlocked. So she went in the back door, went upstairs. There was no sound. She went upstairs, and her granddad was dead, and her granny was dying.
Wow!
And she'd poisoned her husband. And apparently, according to the granddaughter, the granny was a piece of work. She always resented Jack's role at Huddersfield, and when he became manager and he had to do a lot more social events, she hated it, and she in a lot of cases stopped him doing these events as the manager. And it was a really sad story.
She wasn't from Sheffield, was she?
No, from Huddersfield.
No, it's because of like some sort of allegiance. I just thought, well, that's a great story to end with. I shouldn't be.
It is. So that was George Chaplin's brother. Yeah, and I wrote about it in the Huddersfield book, A Murder. And the lady came to the book signing at Huddersfield. I met her, and she's a lovely lady. We had a good laugh about it.
Is that book still available, Jim?
Yeah, still get it. You'll still get it on Amazon, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. If you want to read
it, I've not got any copies, but I'm sure you'll find one online. It's a good read. It's a good read.
You've written one about Man United as well, haven't you? Is that right?
I did, yeah. The Busby Babes, the Busby era, 45 to 60, 69. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so if you like reading about football books and football, there are two good reads there. I know we've got plenty of listeners who do like to collect football books, of which I'm one. So fantastic. Well, yet again, Jim, thanks for another great episode.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I enjoyed it.
So that's from 1918 to 1968. So that's 50 years, isn't it?
Yeah. And the record went from £500 to £90,000.
And we're going to cover pretty much the next 50 years, aren't we?
We are. Yeah.
So that's a good two-parter. So do join us next week. We should be doing this. And I bid you farewell.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
88 Company dismissed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.